Hello everyone and welcome to another Lacuna Passage devlog. Today I'm going to be showing you guys a few more things with our user interface, similar to what we showed in our last video. And this time we're going to focus more on some of the survival statistics stuff that will be a big part of our sandbox mode. So I'm going to jump right in and show you guys a few things real quick. You can see over here in Unity we've got our inspector open to show some of the stats that you'll have to keep track of while playing, although they'll be displayed a little bit differently than you see over there. So that's kind of the behind the scenes look at what sort of stats are being tracked. And then the way that we show them in the game is on this vital screen. So this vital screen, you'll notice there's a suspicious lack of numbers or health bars. That is entirely intentional. We really want to avoid having the game feel like you're managing a bunch of health bars. It helps, personally, I think, add to the realism of the game, but we still need to make sure that you're able to accurately assess your current health situation so that you're not confused about what you need to do to stay healthy. So one of the ways that we've done that is to try and turn sort of a vital screen or health readouts from your suit into visual markers for your current state. So the most obvious one that does have a number is in the nutrition box. You'll see we've got a current number of calories that you have stored from food that you've consumed. So those calories are slowly going to tick down over time, and faster depending on what you're doing, if you're running or jumping. And then we have things like trace vitamins and lipids. So if you pretty much for each of these boxes, so we've got nutrition, hydration, exhaustion, and exposure. The order of severity goes from top to bottom. So the top elements are going to be the less severe indicators of current health, and then down to the bottom are the most severe indicators of health. So for example, you might be out of calories, so you might have not eaten for a few days. So that top calories, so let's go ahead and change that setting actually. So if I go in here to calorie settings and we change your current calorie level to 0. So you'll see a few things changed right away. The color of your calories readout has dropped to bright red, so that's important to know that, okay, you're completely out of calories, that's bad. But it's not horrible because you still have decent trace vitamins and below normal lipids. So your overall health is starting to slip, but you're not in immediate danger. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying about from top to bottom to severity. So, immediate priority, you should probably get some more food in you. Otherwise, these other indicators, the trace vitamins and normal lipid levels, are going to drop to unsafe levels to potential death situation. And we can see that with our hydration as well. So if we drop our hydration level to, say, let's do 25%, you can see that we now have low electrolytes and dangerously high blood cell count. The blood cell count and trace vitamins for nutrition and hydration, those middle markers for each box, are impacted by each other. So hydration, your blood cell count is impacted by your nutrition, and your trace vitamin levels are impacted by your hydration, and vice versa. So that kind of gives an overall health indicator to say, okay, if you're both malnourished and dehydrated, that is also going to impact you at a faster rate for your overall health level. So those lipids and your bun creatine ratios are going to drop. Now, some of these things we're not biology majors or doctors, so I've done a fair amount of research to try and get this as close to accurate as possible for what you might expect real health readouts to show in cases of survival scenarios, depending on your nutrition, your hydration, and exhaustion, etc. But if you guys know of anything that doesn't appear to be um, what you would consider accurate, or if you have a better idea of how we might display a specific marker, maybe the blood cell count isn't a great way to show hydration. Based on what I found, a higher blood cell count is indicative of basically a low water level in your blood. So if you take a blood sample, there's going to be more blood cells in that sample than there are than the surrounding fluids, since you're low on fluids. So that's indicative of dehydration. So that's just one example. And if you're looking at these and you see, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't quite make sense, and you know what you're talking about in terms of biology, just let us know. Put a comment or email us, and we'd love to hear about ways we can improve the realism of this. Obviously, within the bounds of a game, sometimes that's difficult to do, to balance gameplay with realism, but we do want to strive to make this as readable as possible and still as accurate as possible. So, but yeah, so we've also got exhaustion. Now, exhaustion is one of those things where there's not really a health marker that's very easy to correlate to exhaustion, but the way we figure as the character in the game, you would be aware of your own exhaustion, but as the player playing the game, you can't feel exhausted. So we have to have some kind of indicator for your exhaustion level, even if that doesn't really make sense in reality. So we have the well-rested indicator, which we can change that to like 50%. So you're still rested if you're at 50%, but you can see how your exhaustion for blood oxygen level and stuff are being impacted by your overall nutrition and hydration as well. So you can't straight up die from exhaustion, but it is going to make your overall health percentage based modifier, basically. So your overall exhaustion is going to impact like how healthy you can be at maximum health level. So if you're very, very exhausted, that just means that you're starting with a lower health pool effectively for your other stats. And that then kind of carries over into exposure. Exposure, we are actually going to be using radiation as a boundary system for our game. We decided that we don't want to have oxygen alone be the sole way to prevent the player from exploring the edges of the map. So this is another one of those places where we have to kind of exaggerate the gaminess aspect of it a little bit, just to prevent people from seeing the edges of the map or falling off the map. So we're going to have radiation zones, high radiation zones in certain parts of the map, so that you can't explore into areas that aren't completed. Mostly just the edges of the map so you don't fall off. But although radiation will be a health risk in other scenarios too, there might be a solar flare effectively that has a high radiation exposure if you're out during an EVA, and so over time during the course of the game you might build up a high radiation exposure from walking in certain areas that were high radiation, or from these randomized events that would suddenly bathe you in a large dose of radiation, and so you'd have to find radiation medication to reduce that. So exposure is one of the few stats in the game that actually just builds up slowly over time over the whole course of the whole play session or game that you're playing. So you have to manage that accordingly. So knowing that every time you go out for an EVA, you're going to be exposed to a small amount of radiation that builds up over time. So you have to manage that, make sure you have the radiation medication. But yeah, that'll be a pretty low priority, I think, for most players as far as what they're concerning themselves with when they go out on EVAs. But we are going to be using that as a method to prevent the player from exploring in places where we don't want them to go. And then we have body temperature. So body temperature, that one is more directly tied to your battery levels of your suit. So if your battery dies, that is going to be a concern that you need to get back to base, or else eventually uh, your heat will radiate out into the atmosphere and you won't have enough internal body temperature to stay alive. So right here we have the external temperature, which is the negative 20 degrees Celsius right now, and your current body temperature, which is 37 degrees Celsius. So if your battery dies, you're going to be quickly reduced to the current external temperature. Excuse me. So you're just going to need to manage that accordingly. Make sure you mostly just manage your battery level. And your organ integrity is impacted by both radiation and body temperature. So if you have, let's see, I guess we could show you this real quick. So let's do temperature. We'll set, or I guess we have to set the battery to 0 so that you run out of battery. So now we will see your body temperature slowly dropping, and then if we set the radiation rate much higher, you'll see that now we're getting 80 MSV per minute, and so that total radiation exposure is climbing quite quickly now. And it takes about 4,000 MSV to typically kill someone. They can survive if they remove themselves from the exposure, from the radiation exposure, and are quickly treated with medication. But as soon as you make it over 4,000 MSV, then you're going to start having serious challenge to survival unless you get medical attention to yourself. So that's very well reflected in our game, and you'll see how now all of these stats are starting to drop because of your overall health as a percentage of different impacting stats that are working in concert to tell your overall health. So yeah, we're basically going to have organ failure, so we're about to die. So, and the reason that is, even though we haven't quite reached 4,000 MSV radiation, our body temperature is so low, our nutrition is so low, our hydration is quite low. So all of these things are working together. So as you get an overall picture looking at this screen. So the more things that are yellow, orange, or red, the closer you are to death. So just the fact that our total radiation is still relatively in the green, it doesn't tell you the whole picture. You really have to watch all these stats and make sure that they're all managed and kept at a decent level, or else you are going to be in danger of dying, just because all of them working together might cause you to be in a dire survival situation. So yeah, that's our vital screen. Now we also have our survival system sleep timer integrated, so that your survival stats are impacted by the amount of time that you sleep. So you can see here, we've got 11 hours of daylight remaining. We've got the current time. We can choose how long we want to sleep until, and it displays, the exact number of hours. You can increment it by 0.5 hours. So let's say we want to go till dark, so we can sleep for 11 hours, and that's going to burn 500 calories. Now it's going to do more than that, but that's the one marker that we approximate on this screen. We might approximate others, but so that it gives you just a general idea of how much your survival stats are going to be impacted by sleeping. So let's go ahead and do that. And so now you can see it's starting to get dark. So stars are starting to come out. So daylight is over. Now, we are going to make this something you can only do when you're at a bunk in a habitat. So you'll only be able to sleep at a bunk in a habitat or in an emergency pop tent if you have one available. So you won't be able to just go and do this anywhere, though we may add an option to wait for a certain amount of time, similar to sleeping. But sleeping is a different metabolic process, obviously, for survival, where it's going to be a different impact on your health than if you were just like standing around. And I can show you some of the changes that we've made to the inventory and crafting screen actually. So let's check out the crafting screen first. Last time you saw this, it was pretty rough still actually. So let's take a look here now. We've got it so that it's requiring tools in your inventory. So you actually are going to be required to have certain tools, equipment in your inventory that are not consumed in the process of building something, but they are required in order to build it. So in this case, for our emergency pop tent, if we choose to build that, it requires a cutting tool, 2 building tools, and 2 engineering tools. And you can see those are all green down there and they're tools required. So we can make this item because we have the correct tools. And now you can see on the right hand side, you can we now have these large numbers that are in the center of the icons for materials, and those are placeholder right now. Those will be replaced by actual icons, graphic icons that represent what the item is. Before I explained how our crafting system uses a tag method for organizing items into how they can be combined to make other items. So we need 2 metal structural supports. So if I click on one of those slots, it'll bring me over to the ones that I have in my inventory. So I have 3 different types of metal structural supports. I have a generic metal structural support that was probably gained from salvaging another item, and so when you salvage an item, you get back a generic version of whatever materials were required to build it. So I have a metal structural support, I have a metal pipe that also functions as a metal structural support, and I have metal sheeting that functions for that as well. So I can select a metal pipe and I can select a metal sheeting. So now I've satisfied those 2 slots that were required for the metal structural support requirements for the emergency pop tent. And I can do the same for these other slots, so I can use these ones. Now you'll see here for the atmospheric stress fabric, it has a little asterisk next to the name of the actual item. So the suit fabric functions as atmospheric stress fabric, but that asterisk represents the fact that it has multiple material tags. So suit fabric can function as more than just atmospheric stress fabric. It can also function as, for example, scrap fabric. So you might have to manage your resources to say, okay, I'll probably want to use only items that have a single material tag first. So, since they only have one purpose, I can use those first and save my materials that have multiple tags because they're more flexible in what they can be used to build. So in this case, we'll use the atmospheric stress fabric first and foremost. Plastic structural support, we can do kind of the same thing. Make sure we're just using ones that only have a single material tag when they don't have that asterisk there. So we select all these. So some of these have asterisks, but I'm just doing for example. So then we finally get this build item button to come up, and if you want to undo this, you just can say change plan and pick a different plan. All the materials that you've slotted will go back to your inventory. You don't lose any of the ones that are currently slotted, but let's just build it. So then we added an emergency pop tent to our inventory. So then if we go back to our inventory, and it takes a long time to load the inventory right now just because I have it full of a ton of test items. So, but normally you will not have this many items in your inventory, I don't think. But if we go to equipment now, we can see emergency pop tent. We now have 2 of them. I only had 1 in the inventory before. So this is where we will have options. It's not in there right yet, but there'll be context sensitive options available from your inventory. So if you're in a location that would allow you to use this item, there'll be a context sensitive option here that tells you, okay, deploy emergency pop tent, and you'll be able to set that down on the ground, for example. But yeah, depending on the item, there'll be context sensitive actions that you can take. A lot of items will require you to be inside of a habitat. For example, consumables, You will not be able to utilize consumables unless you're inside a habitat, because you can't really eat through your helmet. So that just gives you kind of an idea of where we're at. Now I'm in the process now of adding in more items to your inventory, or to the items that are available for finding in the game, and creating a set of the survival stat modifications. So for example, coffee. So coffee will, if you remember back from the vital screen, coffee will increase your hydration a little bit, and it will increase or decrease your exhaustion by a decent amount. But it will also have a small impact on your health. It will like a very small amount. It'll impact your health negatively. So you can't just drink a bunch of coffee to stay awake for 3 days. That would not be healthy. But it would make it so you weren't exhausted. But so we're balancing those kind of stat changes that will happen when you consume these items. Different items will have different carbs, or I should say calorie counts, and different effects on your overall health depending on what they are. So yeah, that's we're kind of in the process of that right now, and we'll be adding obviously the actual visual icons, so it'll be easier to navigate your inventory and see, try to find what you're looking for. But again, you probably won't have quite this many items in your inventory, so hopefully it won't be quite so cluttered. Yeah. Let's see if there's anything else that I wanted to show you guys. Yeah, I think that was it. So crafting, inventory, and the vital screen are all now, obviously we would be dead by now. But yeah, if you guys have any comments or questions about what we're working on, let us know. And again, if you have information that would help us from a biological standpoint or a medical standpoint, please give us your thoughts and share your knowledge with us. We are 2 people essentially working on this full time, and sometimes my research can be a bit spotty. So hopefully you guys like where we're headed, and yeah, we will have more updates for you soon. Thanks for watching.